Order, order. We start with question to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Adam Cowsall.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we have seen calamitous events again in Scotland this week. However, I'd like to wish Humza Yousaf very well for the future. I always found him a very decent man to work with, and there is no doubt that he was dealt a rotten hand. And whilst I don't want to dwell unduly on the private grief of the members on the SNB benches, I'll say this. I very much hope that whoever becomes First Minister will work with us on the issues that really matter for the people of Scotland, like public services and our economy, and will not continue to obsess with independence. Turning, Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 1, 5 and 12 together. This government is taking long-term decisions to cut taxes for working people and to grow the economy. The spring budget represented a significant milestone in the UK government's levelling up mission, with investment into Scotland bursting through the £3 billion mark. In addition, the Scottish Government will benefit from a £295 million funding uplift through the Barnett formula for 2024 to 2025. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Adam Cowsall.
The reality is, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor's regressive spring budget left the people of Scotland behind, whilst in contrast, the SNP Scottish Government took the bold step of implementing a progressive tax scheme. The Westminster establishment argued that Scotland's income tax would somehow cause people to leave the country. Last week, however, it was revealed by this government's own HMRC that the opposite is true, with many more taxpayers moving to Scotland than leaving. So will the Secretary of State join me in welcoming this brilliant news and congratulate the Scottish Government who are standing up for the people of Scotland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady's point would be relevant if the report she's referring to wasn't from 2018 to 2019, long before we entered into 6 tax bans in Scotland versus 3 in the rest of the UK. So absolutely I don't agree with her.
Speaker, the Secretary of State mentioning levelling up, which was curious. So we know that the budget is cuts to public services across the board, cuts to Scotland's capital funding, and yet levelling up seems to benefit places like, for example, the financial district of Canary Wharf, which benefits them by £16,000 per head. So is the Secretary of State suggesting that Scotland should accept austerity from this government, but not other parts of the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a ridiculous remark. The levelling up agenda in Scotland has been fantastically successful. And there has been absolutely no austerity. The Scottish Government received a block grant, a record block grant of £41 billion, the highest since devolution began. And I'm surprised the SNP want to talk about budgets, Mr. Speaker, because the Scottish Government's budget put taxes up and they cut vital public services, so Scots are actually paying more, getting less.
Gavin Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What utter nonsense from the Secretary of State. The hypocrisy of this Tory party, who are busy gaslighting the Scottish public by complaining about cuts to capital spending, whilst the Tory government is busy cutting 16%, £822 million from the Scottish Government's capital block grant allocations is quite astonishing. With Westminster holding Scotland back yet again, can the Secretary of State tell us, as Scotland's man in the Cabinet, if he argued against these cuts, and will he argue for the Scottish Parliament to have the ability to raise more in capital borrowing to mitigate these savage Westminster cuts and to help drive Scotland forward?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the fiscal framework settlement, we made it very clear and agreed with the Scottish Government that resource funding could be reallocated, if they so wished, out of the record block grant into capital funding, and that's what's happened. And there is additionally the ability to borrow £450 million if they're required to do so.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin too by passing on my best wishes to Humza Yousaf and his family. I always found him very personable in my dealings with him although I disagreed with virtually everything that he has said or done as First Minister of Scotland, in particular putting up taxes and delivering poorer public services. Is my right honourable friend aware that businesses in my constituency are struggling to recruit employees from other parts of the United Kingdom because of these higher tax rates in Scotland, and that is damaging our local economy?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend makes a very good point, and I'm well aware, and businesses likewise in Dumfries and Galloway have said the same. 6 tax bans in Scotland versus 3 tax bans in the rest of the United Kingdom is not the way to incentivise people to go and work in Scotland or even to relocate their businesses to Scotland.
Shall Secretary of State Ian Murray?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On this International Workers' May Day, Scottish television journalists are striking for fair pay. I'm sure the Secretary of State will join me in insisting Scottish television get back around the table with their journalists to thrash out an acceptable deal. Given all the news that's happening this week, we need them back on the television. Can I also pay tribute to the outgoing First Minister Humza Yousaf, Mr. Speaker? We may not have agreed on everything, but his historic appointment marked a pivotal moment in our multicultural public life in Scotland, and I wish him well and his family for the future. Mr. Speaker, the spring budget was just another moment which exposed the damage done by the chaos of the former First Prime Minister's kamikaze budget. The Secretary of State has been spinning that it brings taxes down, but isn't it the case that the tax burden in Scotland and across the rest of the UK continues to rise? And now the Prime Minister wants to mirror his irresponsible predecessor with an unfunded £46 billion policy to get rid of national insurance altogether. Now, the Secretary of State sits round the Cabinet table, so which one have they discussed to pay for this? Will it be pensioners, the NHS or income tax rises?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the honourable gentleman, I do agree with him that the tax burden in Scotland is too high and rising, and people are paying more and they're getting less, and I agree with him on that. Unfortunately, the UK government has taken the decision to partially offset that by not income tax cuts, but national insurance cuts, 4 pence off national insurance. And that, and to pick up on his last point, is an aspiration that this government has. It has already reduced national insurance by 4 pence, a third, and it would be an aspiration to remove it altogether because it's a tax on jobs.
£46 billion unfunded aspiration, and the Secretary of State or the Government won't tell us where they'll get the money from. Mr. Speaker, the truth is that Scotland is trapped between 2 chaotic and failing governments. We've had 3 Prime Ministers and will have had 3 First Ministers in as many years. All the while, the member for Aberdeen South thinks he is already the First Minister by calling the shots but shooting himself firmly in the foot. What is abundantly clear to the people of Scotland is that neither the Scottish or UK governments are even interested in delivering the change that Scotland needs. With neither government wanting to let the people decide, can the Secretary of State tell the House who he thinks is most scared of a general election, the Tories or the SNP?
Well, we absolutely do not fear an election, whether it's a Holyrood election or a general election. As I watch the Nationalists implode again, I say bring it on, I hear them say bring it on from a sedentary position. Bring it on, yes, bring it on. And just start, chaps over there and chapesses, start polishing up your CVs.
SNP spokesperson Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Might I also, on behalf of the SNP group, put on record our sincere thanks to Humza Yousaf for his public service over the months and years, and wish him, Nadia and his family all the best in their future. Can I also observe, Mr. Speaker, that fewer people in Scotland will see our proceedings today because Scottish television is currently blacked out due to a strike by television journalists. I implore the management of STV to get back around the table with the NUJ to improve their pay offer and try and settle this dispute. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the budget that was approved a few months ago also contains forward planning assumptions on income and expenditure over the next 3 to 5 years. Can the Secretary of State tell us what assessment he has made of those assumptions on the Scottish public finances?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the block grant, as I've said before, is a record block grant. It's running over a 3-year period. It averages out at £41.6 billion, and then there are Barnett consequentials that are added to that. And this year, that figure is £295 million based on the spring budget's figures.
Tommy Shepherd.
So that sounds like no assessment at all, to be honest. The truth is that these forward planning assumptions, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, involve public service cuts of up to £20 billion. And that can only imply savage cuts to the Scottish Block grant in the next 2 to 3 years. And sadly, these planning assumptions and the framework are endorsed by the Labour Party. So isn't it the truth that at the coming election, if people vote either Conservative or Labour, they are consenting to massive cuts in public services in Scotland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I don't agree with those figures. And what I'd say is that the public services in Scotland are in a desperate state, and at the budget the Scottish Government's just held, they froze council tax, and thereby pushing more pressure on local authorities to deliver those public services.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2 and 14 together. Scotland Office ministers have regular discussions with the Ministry of Defence on all matters relating to defence. Defence spending contributes significantly to delivering thousands of high-skilled jobs and investment in Scotland. And I welcome the announcement by the Prime Minister that we will increase our defence spending to 2.5% of GDP in response to rising global threats.
Bob Blackman.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. And clearly it's good news for the United Kingdom and Scotland in particular that the 2.5% of GDP is going to be spent on defence. Will my right honourable friend update the House on the number of jobs that will be protected as a result of this decision, and indeed potentially the number of jobs that could be created in Scotland as a result of this decision?
Good point.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the short answer is that the increased investment announced by the Prime Minister will be focused on firing up the UK industrial base. The whole of the United Kingdom will benefit from this, ensuring our armed forces are benefiting from the latest technology. And both of those things will bring economic benefits and support jobs across the whole of the United Kingdom, as I've said, and including Scotland. And I just think at this time of heightened global tension and an illegal war in Ukraine sparked by the Russians, I'm confident that Scotland is going to play a growing role as the UK government ramps its spending up.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, I've been lucky enough to meet some of the amazing military personnel and civilians working at HM Naval Base Clyde. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the increase in defence spending announced last week by the Prime Minister will bring benefits across the whole country, whether at RAF bases in my own constituency or the many military establishments in Scotland, and is another clear demonstration that it is the Conservatives who can be trusted to defend and protect our entire United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely correct. It's the Conservatives that are trusted to defend the whole of the United Kingdom. In particular, I would just highlight the SNP who have consistently proposed abandoning our nuclear deterrent, including in their most recent independence paper. The irony is they want to be part of the NATO alliance, but they don't want to be part of a nuclear NATO alliance.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A vital part of defence spending is ensuring that military personnel live in safe and suitable accommodation. At last week's passage of the Renters Reform Bill in this place, my honourable friend, the member for North Shropshire, ensured concessions from the government on the standards of military accommodation. What assessment has the Secretary of State made on that in Scotland?
So I'd say to the honourable lady, she's absolutely right, and I think it's terrible. As the father of a serving soldier, I completely agree with her, and I know very well, and I hear from members of the military that they're disappointed with the standard of accommodation. I have raised it on a UK-wide basis. I have discussed it with the Defence Secretary, and he said the programme at the moment of improvements, which started before last winter, amounts to £400 million of spending.
Deirdre Brett.
Further to the Secretary of State's comments about nuclear bases, he's, I hope, aware of the alarming rise in more serious nuclear safety incidents at Scotland's Trident nuclear bases on the Clyde. My questions revealed 179 incidents were logged in 2023 and 24, including 6 with a risk of radiation leakage to the environment. The first category A in 15 years. Has he confirmed if there was an actual radioactive leak beyond safe levels for many of these incidents? And what reports will his government produce to reassure crew and those living nearby that the nuclear infrastructure is not, as one former Downing Street advisor described it, dangerously rotting?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've visited Faslane, our base on the Clyde. I can say it's an absolutely fantastic facility. We do not comment on matters relating to Faz Lane. If the honourable lady has any more specific questions, she should bring them to defence questions. But as I say, regarding our nuclear deterrence and our nuclear facility, we do not comment on things that happen there.
Alan Smith.
Number 3, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 3, 7 and 9 together. I am in touch with Home Office ministers regularly to discuss immigration matters that affect Scotland. This government has youth mobility schemes agreed with 13 countries, and we continue to remain open to new arrangements with our international partners, including individual EU member states.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I'm bemused by that answer. I will never shake in my view that Brexit was an act of gross harm against the next generation, particularly in Scotland where we rejected it. But we are where we are, and the EU has offered the UK a comprehensive youth mobility scheme up to the age of 30 for 4 years. That strikes me as a fantastic deal. Scotland wants to do it. Why is he so keen to hold Scotland back? But my actual question is he as delighted as I think he must be that the Labour Party completely agrees with him?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member and the SNP continue to obsess about Brexit and the decision of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. This government is absolutely committed to offering young people the opportunities to travel around the world during their education. That's demonstrated through our association with the Horizon scheme and also the government's Turing scheme.
And McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, the youth mobility scheme would allow young people in my constituency of Glasgow North East and across Scotland to participate in youth exchanges, work, study and travel across Europe. He got to do this. Is his message to my constituents that this freedom was for the likes of him, but it's not for the likes of them?
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government currently operates 13 successful bilateral youth mobility schemes with international parties. Now, the countries where we have arrangements with already include Andorra, Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Iceland, and India, Japan, Monaco, New Zealand, San Marino, South Korea, Taiwan and Uruguay. Now, the members opposite may scoff at these countries, but these countries are offering unique opportunities for Scots to travel internationally and learn, as many of us did as well.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think anyone in Scotland watching this will be incredibly disappointed with the responses that we've had from the Minister today. Now, in March 2021, the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire West said on BBC Scotland that young people were not reaping the benefits of Brexit. Now, I don't often agree with my constituency neighbour to the south, but he was absolutely right then. He's still absolutely right now, isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, of course, the biggest obstacle to opportunities for young people in Scotland is the SNP government. It's the SNP government. Mr. Speaker, by restricting the number of places for Scottish students at Scottish universities so heavily, it seems intent, the Scottish Government seems intent on driving young people out of our country.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having been involved in running a number of our youth mobility schemes, I'm fairly familiar with the concepts they involve, such as cap numbers, reciprocity, the idea that we don't have a large flow one way without the other, limited terms, no access to the welfare system, and the fact that you can't bring dependents with you, given the nature of them being temporary. Would you assure me that we still maintain our position that we had, certainly under the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, that we would do this where it's in the UK's economic interest and where we know that the main drivers, for example, things like immigration abuse, just do not exist, as, for example, why we have the schemes we have with Australia, Canada and New Zealand, and that we maintain that open approach?
Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to my honourable friend's work in this area and his continued interest. I mean, the government's been absolutely clear. We have no plans to agree a EU-wide youth mobility scheme for the reasons that he has highlighted. But we are open to negotiating with individual member states, individual arrangements which suit the United Kingdom and Scotland.
Liz Twist.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has demonstrated its commitment to supporting households across the United Kingdom and in Scotland with the cost of living, with a £108 billion package of support, one of the largest in Europe. Inflation is now at 3.2%, less than half its recent peak, and is expected to fall to its 2% target one earlier than expected.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, according to the Scottish Parliament's own research, as well as the Fraser of Allender Institute, the Scottish Government's child poverty targets for 23 to 24 are not set to be met. Given the dereliction of their net zero targets and the widening attainment gap, does the Secretary of State agree with me that they've given up on governing and on Scottish children's futures?
Mr Speaker, well, I agree with the honourable member that the SNP gave up on governing in Scotland a long time ago, thanks to their continued obsession with independence and referendums. This government remains, the UK government remains absolutely committed to supporting households across Scotland, demonstrated through our increasing the working age benefits by 6.7%, maintaining the triple lock for 12 million pensioners, including and also our cut to national insurance.
Shadow Minister Michael Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I wish Humza Yousaf well for the future, but after a year in office coupled with a Prime Minister clinging on to power, nobody in Scotland is better off. Child poverty is up, life expectancy is falling, NHS waiting lists are up, drug deaths are up, homelessness is up, economic growth has flatlined. Isn't the inescapable truth that Scots are being failed by two governments for far too long? And does the Minister agree with me that what Scotland needs now is to be rid of both these distracted, incompetent and hopelessly out-of-touch governments?
Mr Speaker, I would certainly agree that the Scottish Government, the SNP Government, have not been focused on the day job, whether it's been neglecting Scotland's schools, Scotland's NHS or Scotland's transport network. They have not been getting on with the day job. But the harsh reality is, whoever is elected to replace Humza Yousaf as First Minister will still have the same obsession with independence and referendums.
Stevenson.
Number 6, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Government's assessment is that our internal market is the essential basis in which businesses are able to trade freely across the United Kingdom, minimising red tape and maximising opportunities. In Scotland, 60% of outgoing trade is with the rest of the United Kingdom, more than the rest of the world combined.
The internal market is beneficial for all parts of the United Kingdom. It is, however, more important to those areas where there is a border. Therefore, would the Minister agree that the internal market should be very helpful in maintaining and developing economic activity in the borderlands area, but would he also agree to consider a second borderlands growth deal, which would certainly help the area on both sides of the border?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The UK's internal market is essential to promoting economic activity, ensuring that businesses in the borders, in my own constituency, Carlisle and beyond, benefit from frictionless trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. The Borderlands Growth Deal, with a £265 million investment from the UK Government, was signed in July 2021 and is developing a range of projects to further boost economic growth.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr Speaker, when the BBC has headlines on web pages titled, "Why does Ireland have so much cash?" isn't the reality that independent Ireland is successful in the European and world markets compared to Scotland trapped in the UK? Ireland with a surplus of £8.6 billion to spend in their society, the UK has deficit and cuts hurting people. So can the Minister remind us, what is the size of the UK deficit?
Mr Speaker, I'm very clear that Scotland is better served by being at the heart of a strong United Kingdom. And the spending figures of the Scottish Government are very clear in terms of the dependency of it being part of the UK to support vital public services like the NHS, schools and the transport network.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Stuart Malcolm MacDonald. Right, let us move to Barry Sherman.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, water quality policy is a devolved policy matter in Scotland. The Scottish Government is responsible for biodiversity in rivers and streams in Scotland, not the United Kingdom Government. It would be for the Scottish Government to take action on this vital area.
Is it not the truth that Scottish waters and streams and rivers are purer and cleaner because the Scottish people rejected privatisation of water and, led by Scottish Labour, made sure that we had Scottish water in the public realm and delivered clean water for everyone?
Mr Speaker, well, the honourable member is absolutely wrong. According to a recent report, untreated sewage has been released into Scottish waters and seas more than 58,000 times over the last 5 years. But only 4% of sewage overflows in Scotland are actually required to be monitored, unlike in England and Wales, where nearly 100% are monitored thanks to the efforts of this government. Unlike this government, the Scottish Government and Scottish Water are failing to take the tough action to monitor sewage overflows and protect our very important waterways.
Mayo.
Number 11, sir.
Mr Speaker, this government is committed to protecting free speech. It is the responsibility of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament, working with Police Scotland, to ensure that the hate crime legislation is implemented and enforced in a way that protects freedom of speech and has the confidence of people in Scotland.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr Speaker, the Scottish Government's Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act came into force this month. It's already having a chilling impact on free speech. So what lessons can the UK Government learn from the introduction of this poor legislation in Scotland?
Well, yes, and Police Scotland already have stretched resources, not least because they've been checking up on the SNP finances for the last 3 years. But Mr Speaker, he's absolutely right. We do have concerns that the legislation could have a potential chilling effect on free speech, but it's for the Scottish Government to speak to its own devolved laws. And for my part, I believe it's an awful piece of legislation. It lacks clarity as to what constitutes an offence. And importantly, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has made it very clear that the UK Government will not enact similar legislation.
Chair of the Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
Never before has such rubbish been uttered about a piece of legislation as been uttered about the Hate Crime Act. In 1 week, the Tories have tried to repeal this, and given that this mainly consolidates existing legislation, this will leave us unprotected against Islamophobia, racism and homophobia. Will he now issue one of his famous colonial decrees and tell the Scottish Tories to back off?
Well, Mr Speaker, first of all, those laws already existed. That's the important thing. Secondly, I was right about police resources. The 8,000 hate crime reports in the first week. That is more than was in any of the 7 preceding years. This is a ridiculous, unnecessary piece of legislation.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. I now call Kirsten Oswald.
Question 1, please.
Mr Speaker, I know that the thoughts of the whole House are with the people of Hainault in East London following yesterday's appalling attack. Such violence has no place on our streets. It's absolutely heartbreaking that a teenage boy has died, and I can't imagine what his family are going through. And we send them our heartfelt condolences and offer our very best wishes to all those injured. And I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to the police and other emergency first responders for embodying the highest standards of public service under such awful circumstances. And I know that our thoughts are also with those injured this morning in an attack at a school in Sheffield. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We already know that more than 1 in 5 teenagers are vaping, with some experts describing this as an epidemic. And yesterday, new research suggested that teenagers who vape could be at risk of exposure to toxic metals, potentially harming brain or organ development. I agree with the Prime Minister in his wish to reduce the harms caused by smoking and vaping with the Tobacco and Vapes Bill. Will he agree with me that permitting football strips to be sponsored by vaping companies sends entirely the wrong message to young people, and that it's now time to ban vape companies advertising on sports strips?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Obviously, the decisions about kit sponsorship will rest with individual teams, but I do agree with her that it is important we do everything we can to tackle the scourge of teenage vaping, which is why I'm glad that she supports our bill, which will clamp down on the marketing, availability of flavours, targeting point-of-sale purchases, but also improving funding for trading standards to clamp down on those selling vapes illegally to children.
Dr Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks,
Yes, Mr Speaker, my husband is a veteran and the defence of the country is the government's first duty to protect people across the United Kingdom. So can the Prime Minister reassure the House that he has a plan in place to back our world-leading armed services? And does he know why the party opposite refused to back his plan?
Well, can I start by paying tribute to my honourable friend's husband and all our veterans for their service to our country. And she's right, in the most uncertain times since the Cold War, that it's right that we build our security, protecting our values, our interests, and indeed our nation. That's why this government has taken the step to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, making us the biggest spender in Europe under NATO. And when the Labour leader stands up, I hope that he stops dithering, does the right thing, and confirms that he will back our plan to increase defence spending.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, I join with the Prime Minister in his words about yesterday's awful events at Hainault. I'm sure the whole House will want to commend the first responders and send our deepest condolences to the family of the 14-year-old boy who was murdered. And I join with the Prime Minister in his remarks about the attack in the school in Sheffield as well. I know everyone in this House will be delighted to see His Majesty the King returning to his public duties and looking so well, and we all wish him and the Princess of Wales the best in their continued recovery. I'd also like to welcome the member for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich to his place on these benches. After nearly 2 decades as a Tory politician and an NHS doctor, Mr Speaker, he's concluded that if you care about the future of our country and our NHS, then it's time for change. It's time for this changed Labour Party. And as of today, he's our newest Labour MP, but I'm sure he won't mind me saying that I hope he loses that title on Friday. Mr Speaker, when a lifelong Tory and doctor says that the only cure for the NHS is a Labour government, isn't it the time the Prime Minister admits he has utterly failed?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, I'm glad to actually see the honourable gentleman from Central Suffolk in the House today. That's because he recently pointed out that residents of his local Labour council are, and I quote in his words, charged much more in council tax, but in return receive lower quality services. Now, he's been wrong about some things recently, but on that point, he's absolutely right. And this week, people everywhere should vote Conservative.
He comes out with all that nonsense, but he locks himself away in Downing Street bunker, moaning that people aren't grateful enough to him. The reality is Tory MPs are following Tory voters in concluding that only the Labour Party can deliver the change that the country needs. And I say to those Tory voters, if they believe in a better Britain, then they're safe with this changed Labour Party, and it's for them. Mr Speaker, in the 2 weeks since we last met at this dispatch box, has the Prime Minister managed to find the money for his completely unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance?
Mr Speaker, of course, we addressed that a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to address it again. But I know that economics is not his strong point, but he might do well. He might do well, actually, to listen to a shadow education secretary who just this morning said, no, that's not how it works, Mr Speaker. Indeed, the IFS have also said the link between national insurance and public services funding is illusory, just like Labour's economic plans, Mr Speaker. But it's crystal clear. There's one party that's going to deliver tax cuts for working Britain, and it's the Conservative Party.
That was a long ramble.
Whoever's banging the furniture will have to pay for your damages. Can we have less of it? We are not at the sixth form now. Come on, Prof.
Well, that was a long, rambling non-answer to the question, which was, has he found the money to fund his £46 billion promise to abolish national insurance? And whenever he's asked about the date of the election or people's pensions, he acts as if answering straightforward questions is somehow beneath him. But pensioners and those who are planning their retirement deserve better than his contempt for their questions. Because if £46 billion were cut from its funding, the value of the state pension would almost halve. So I don't apologise for asking him again.
Order. Mr Gullis, you've got the next question you're not going to reach. You've got a 10-minute rule bill. I'd be quiet for a while if I were you. Prime Minister. Sorry, Leader of the Opposition.
So I don't apologise for asking on their behalf again whether he will finally rule out cutting their state pension to fulfil the enormous black hole in his spending plans.
Mr Speaker, of course we can rule that out, and the honourable gentleman should stop scaremongering, because it's thanks to the triple lock that we've increased pensions by £3,700 since 2010, and they will rise in each and every year of the next Parliament. But it's Labour that always hits pensioners hard. It's his mentors, Blair and Brown, that broke their promises, raised pension taxes by £118 billion and delivered an insulting 75p rise in the state pension. As one former Labour advisor just said, Brown destroyed our pension system. They did it before, they'll do it again. Labour always betray our pensioners.
Mr Speaker, it's clear he can't answer the question where he's going to find this £46 billion. No, he said, luckily for him, that's where he said it's not coming from. It's not said where it's coming from. Luckily for him, one of his peers, Lord Frost, yes, him again, does. He says to solve the Tory spending plans, the state pension age should be raised to 75. Now, understandably, that will cause some alarm. So will the Prime Minister rule out forcing people to delay their retirement by years and years in order to fulfil his £46 billion black hole?
Mr Speaker, I've answered this multiple times to the Honourable Gentleman. I'm happy to say again, this is the party that has delivered and protected the triple lock. But I know, Mr Speaker, ultimately he's not worried about any of this, because we all remember that he's got his very own personal pension plan. I think we all remember it, Mr Speaker. Indeed, it comes with its very own special law. It was called the Pension Increase Scheme for Keir Starmer QC. It's literally one law for him and another one for everyone else.
He wants to abolish national insurance. It'll cost £46 billion, and he won't tell us where the money is coming from. We're no closer to an answer. I'm going to persevere, because last year the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners. His Paymaster General went a step further. He said these are the sorts of things that we need to look at. So will he now rule out taking pensioners' winter fuel payments off them to help fund his £46 billion black hole?
Mr Speaker, it was this government that just this winter provided double the winter fuel payment to support pensioners. But what is crystal clear, Mr Speaker, is that we believe that the double taxation on work is unfair, Mr Speaker. We believe that hard work should be rewarded, and that's why this week we're cutting taxes by £900 for everyone in work. But in contrast, Mr Speaker, it's Labour's newest tax advisor who thinks pensioners should be taxed more. That's his words, Mr Speaker. This advisor calls them codgers. He thinks that supporting them is a disgrace, and he believes that their free TV licences are ridiculous, Mr Speaker. It's Labour who hit pensioners with tax after tax, and they would do it all over again.
Mr Speaker, is it any wonder that his MPs are following Tory voters in queuing up to dump his party? And even the mayors that he's apparently pinning his political survival on don't want to be seen anywhere near him, because until he starts setting out how he's paying for his fantasy economics, he's got a completely unfunded £46 billion promise that puts people's retirement at risk. How does it feel to be one day out from elections with the message, vote Tory, risk your pension?
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow voters will have a choice, and it will be a choice. It will be a choice between mayors like Andy Street and Ben Houchen who are delivering, or mayors like Sadiq Khan who just simply virtue signal, Mr. Speaker. It's higher taxes, more crime and ULEZ with Labour, or it's lower taxes and better services with the Conservatives. That's the choice. From West Midlands to Teesside to London, there is only one choice. Vote Conservative.
Mr. Speaker, we can see the Rwanda deterrent is working, and we've now deported our first illegal migrants. But unsurprisingly, Labour just don't care. The Shadow Home Secretary is busy posing for pics, encouraging more boats to come over. The leader of the Labour Party said he would cancel the Rwanda flights. He took a knee when signing letters stopping us deporting illegal foreign national offenders who committed crimes like murder and rape. And he'd do a deal with the EU, surrendering our borders to 100,000 legal migrants. Isn't it right, Prime Minister, that only the Conservatives will stop the boats and cut legal migration?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working. Legal migration, the latest figures show, down by 24%. Student dependence down by 80%. But we all know Labour's big idea. It's to scrap the Rwanda plan, even when it's operational, Mr. Speaker. But as one senior Labour advisor said to Andrew Marr just yesterday, we can't just come in, tear it up and have nothing to put in its place. I'm sorry to break it to them, but that's exactly their policy. While we're getting on stopping the boats, all Labour would do is stop the planes.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Armed Forces Minister was neither able to confirm nor deny that UK troops may soon be deployed on the ground in the Middle East. Now, the public watching will be hoping that members of this House do not have a short memory when it comes to the potential deployment and involvement of our military in the Middle East. So can I ask the Prime Minister to provide some much-needed clarity? Is he giving active consideration to the deployment of UK forces in the Middle East, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, you wouldn't expect me to get into any operational planning details, but what I will say is we are absolutely committed to supporting international efforts to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is something I think the whole House would support by land, sea and air. We've obviously tripled our aid commitment, and right now, together with the US, Cyprus and other partners, we're setting up a new temporary pier off the coast of Gaza to get aid in as securely and quickly as possible.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, let's all be in no doubt. Aid is required in Gaza, and it is required because when people are not being bombed, they are starving to death. The solution to that is a ceasefire and the opening of safe ground air routes, not the involvement on the ground of UK military personnel. These are dramatic and potentially dangerous developments. So will the Prime Minister confirm to the House today that before he makes a decision, all members will be afforded a vote?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to apologise for our armed forces playing a leading role in supporting international efforts to get more aid in. And indeed, we are sending Royal Navy support ship, RFA Cardigan Bay, to the region to support that effort. But when he talks about this conflict, the fastest way to end this conflict is to ensure that we have a hostage deal that gets hostages out, aid in, and for there to be a sustainable pause in the fighting. And it seems clear that there now is a workable offer on the table, so I hope he joins with me in encouraging all parties, including Hamas, to accept that deal so we can move towards a sustainable solution.
Sir Bill Wigan. My right honourable friend's decision to cancel HS2 led to £207 million for Herefordshire's potholes and transport infrastructure. Hereford Hospital has a new wards, more beds and a new diagnostic centre on the way. £35 million has been allocated to the River Wye recovery plan. Inflation is down, the Rwanda bill has been passed, and defence spending is increasing. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if he carries on like this, he's going to win the next election?
Mr. Speaker, I'm thankful for my honourable friend in highlighting the work that the government's doing, whether that is increasing our defence spending to keep us safe, securing our borders with our Rwanda Act, cutting taxes by £900, raising the state pension by £900. And I'm also pleased that locally in Herefordshire we are filling in potholes, helping to save the River Wye and improving local health services. It shows crystal clear that it's the Conservative government that has a plan and is delivering a brighter future for our country.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In February, his Foreign Secretary said it would be difficult for a ground offensive on Rafah to avoid harming civilians and destroying homes. Just yesterday, his Deputy Foreign Secretary admitted he was struggling to see how such an attack could be compliant with international humanitarian law. All the signs are that Netanyahu is about to defy the international community. An attack on the 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah is imminent. If that attack begins, will that be the moment when the Prime Minister finally finds the moral backbone to ban arms exports to Israel? And if not, how much more suffering has to happen before he acts to prevent further UK complicity in crimes against humanity?
Harming civilians. I've made these points repeatedly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, specifically about the impact of any military incursion into Rafah, and we continue to say to the Israelis at all levels that we want to see more aid going in and bring about a hostage deal so we can move towards a sustainable ceasefire.
Andrew Slough.
The 60% increase in funding for special educational needs and disabilities is extremely welcome. But the challenges around the recruitment of community paediatricians mean that some children in Leighton Buzzard, Dunstable and Houghton Regis are waiting too long for an assessment. What can the NHS do to attract more of the 39,000 additional doctors recruited under this government into community paediatrics as a specialty, which is incredibly rewarding and important?
Oh, my honourable friend is right, and I know he joins me in welcoming the significant action that we've taken already to improve children's health, whether that's reducing sugar in children's foods, but the £600 million we've also invested to improve the quality of sport and physical activity in schools. The NHS has established a special group to ensure that the recovery of paediatric services keeps pace with that of adult elective care too, and I know that he will be pleased that the NHS long-term workforce plan that we have fully backed doubles the number of medical school places in England, increases specialty training places, and that will increase the size of the pool from which community paediatricians can be drawn in the future.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you. I know that you, Mr. Speaker, want to join me in sending condolences to the friends, family and colleagues of our former colleague Lord Andrew Stunnell, who served with exceptional diligence and grace as MP for Hazel Grove in this House and who passed away very suddenly on Monday. Mr. Speaker, when the BBC ends long-wave radio transmission next year, they will also end access to electricity tariffs like total heating with total control, relied on by almost 1 million households across the United Kingdom. Switching to smart meters is not going to fix this for most people, not least because the rollout programme is so far behind. So will the Prime Minister or possibly His Secretary of State for Energy get the energy companies, the regulator and the customer groups together so that we can stop passing the blame around and find a solution that does not yet again leave people in the Highlands and Islands behind and out in the cold?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I understand that an agreement has now been reached to ensure that radio teleswitching services will continue until June of next year, and Ofgem are also engaging with energy suppliers on their plans to support consumers through the transition. Whilst households that are currently covered by the service shouldn't be disadvantaged by the switch-off, it's energy suppliers who are best placed to advise on tariffs for those who have been switched to a smart meter. However, I will make sure that the right honourable gentleman does get a meeting with the relevant minister to ensure that his constituents are not left behind during the transition.
Peter Aldis.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The East of England is playing a lead role in delivering the UK's energy security, and without our contribution, the country will not be able to successfully transition to a renewable energy supply system. In recent months, our coast has taken a battering, and projects like the Lowestoft Flood Defence Scheme have been postponed. Will my right honourable friend ensure that government departments are fully coordinated so as to provide the region with good supporting infrastructure, proper protection for coastal communities, and every opportunity for local people to take up exciting new jobs?
Mr. Speaker, we are levelling up across the United Kingdom and investing in places that need it most, including, as my honourable friend rightly highlights, our coastal communities. Almost £1 billion of levelling up funding has been allocated to the east of England, including £75 million for coastal places. I know that he welcomes the town deal for Lowestoft in particular, but I will ensure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss how we can further support his region, its role in our energy security, but particular its coastal communities.
Deirdre Brown.
Mr. Speaker, the Greenpeace group Unearthed found 36 supposed grassroots campaign groups which were actually administered by Conservative staff and activists and were forums for vile racism, anti-Semitism and Islamophobic attacks on Sadiq Khan. Now, one hears of other such coordinated efforts around anti-20-mile-per-hour zones in Wales. Can the Prime Minister shed some light on these shady groups spreading abuse, their funding, their links to his party, and whether he is aware of similar operations existing elsewhere in the UK? If he won't, will he at least commit today to investigate and take action to tackle the sources of this grubby gutter politics?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware about the topic that the honourable lady raises, but I'm not going to make any apology for Conservatives pointing out the record of whether it's the SNP in Scotland or the Labour government in Wales, because that's exactly what democratic process is about. She might not like it when we highlight their record, but we will keep doing so that we can deliver for people across the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome our government's commitments to boosting defence spending and supporting Ukraine, made possible by this Conservative Prime Minister's international leadership and sound management of the economy. My constituents have been doing us proud supporting Ukraine, like the Pot Place Garden Centre delivering ambulances, medical equipment and supplies, and Steve Hodgson providing vital aid. Would the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to my constituents and people up and down the land for their support for Ukraine and reaffirm that we will continue to stand with Ukraine for the sake of freedom, democracy and global security?
I join my honourable friend in thanking people up and down the country, including the fantastic work of his constituents in supporting the Ukrainian community in the face of Putin's illegal invasion. We remain steadfast in support of Ukraine, and in total, since the war began, we've pledged over £12 billion of aid to Ukraine. Last week, we announced an additional £500 million of funding, which will be used to deliver much-needed ammunition, air defence and engineering support and drones. But more importantly, and President Zelensky welcomed this, we are able to now say that we will continue with this level of support for as long as it takes because of the historic increase in our defence spending. And it's crystal clear that on this side of the House, we can say that our support to Ukraine will never waver.
Margaret Greenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1969, my constituent Georgina Jacobs gave birth to a baby boy who she named Robert. Sadly, Robert was born asleep, and in those days the hospitals would ask the father to collect the baby's body, take it to the cemetery and leave it there for burial. For 53 years, Georgina didn't know exactly where Robert was buried. When she eventually found him, she shared her story on social media, and other mothers who'd been through the same experience got in touch. Since then, Georgina has located over 60 babies on behalf of grieving parents and has deservedly been presented with the Wirral Award for her achievements. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Georgina on her award and on having brought comfort to so many parents and families? And will he, on behalf of all previous governments, apologise for this form of practice which left grieving parents with nowhere to visit their buried children?
Well, can I thank and commend the Honourable Lady for raising this case and just pay tribute to Georgina for what she is doing. I often say that one of the most incredible things about doing this job is meeting people like Georgina who have suffered tragedy in their lives, but then use that to campaign and inspire and bring about a better life for everyone else. She's a prime example of that. She deserves nothing but our praise and admiration, and I'm so pleased that she's brought comfort to so many.
Manufacturing Technology Centre, which the Prime Minister visited, High Temperature Research Centre, Rolls-Royce, Parker Meggitt, Fanuc and the London Electric Vehicle Company. Given that every Labour government has left office with unemployment higher than when they came in, can the Prime Minister see any reason why anybody would want to put this fantastic progress at risk?
I was pleased to see for myself on a recent visit that my honourable friend is a great champion for his constituents in Rugby, and I was very pleased to see the thriving local technology and manufacturing industry, which will help us deliver on our ambitions to make the UK a science and technology superpower. And he's right that we do have a record with 1 million fewer workless households, unemployment near record lows, and he's also right that we need to stick to that plan, because that's how we'll deliver the long-term change that our country needs and deliver a brighter future for families up and down the country, including in his constituency.
Colin Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hypocrisy needs called out, and everyone in this House will recall the former Irish Prime Minister in Brussels with a photograph of a bombed customs post, lamenting that any border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland was unworkable, it was in breach of the Belfast Agreement and could result in such troubles again. The hypocrisy of the Irish government from such a position has not been lost, with the Irish police now tasked to patrol the border, protect from the unsubstantiated, unfounded 80% figure of asylum seekers who supposedly make their way to the Republic of Ireland from the UK via Northern Ireland, when actually the reverse is true. Will the Prime Minister challenge and call out these actions and confirm what representations he has made to the Irish Prime Minister and the Justice Minister to respect the integrity of our UK and our border?
Well, the House will be aware that we have made commitments to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, and the Honourable Lady makes a very important point that the Irish Government must uphold its promises too. We can't have cherry-picking of important international agreements, and so the Secretary of State is seeking urgent clarification that there will be no disruption or police checkpoints at or near the border, and I can confirm that the United Kingdom has no legal obligation to accept returns of illegal migrants from Ireland. Now, it's no surprise that our robust approach to illegal migration is providing a deterrent, but the answer is not sending police to villages in Donegal. It's to work with us in partnership to strengthen our external borders all around the common travel area that we share.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, I was the Lord Commissioner that signed the Right Honourable Gentleman's special pension into law. He owes me one. But the Prime Minister is right. Labour's 75 pence was an insult to pensioners. Yet last year, our triple lock afforded pensioners the highest increase in 30 years. The Prime Minister is going to continue to deliver for dignity in retirement, isn't he?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right that we will provide dignity to all those in retirement. That's why we introduced the triple lock, and that's why this year the state pension is rising by £900. I'm also proud of our record to bring 200,000 pensioners out of poverty, and I can also say Labour pensioners in this country can trust the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, in only one of the 194 local authority areas in England are NHS ambulances meeting the national response time targets for responding to potential heart and stroke victims. Does the Prime Minister know which one it is?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to ambulance waiting times in A&E, of course there's more work to do, but the place where they are the over last winter, we have 800 more ambulances on the road, faster discharge out of our emergency care centres, and 10,000 virtual ward beds. Of course, as I said, there is more to do, but the contrast to Labour on Wales is crystal clear. It's the worst A&E performance anywhere in Great Britain.
Stephen Crabb.
Mr. Speaker. For 6 months, thousands of my constituents have lived with foul, polluted air from the Withyhedge landfill site. The company is owned by somebody with previous convictions for environmental crimes and who, a few months ago, gave £200,000 to help Vaughan Gething become First Minister of Wales, after another of his other companies was loaned £400,000 from the Development Bank of Wales, overseen by the then Economy Minister, Vaughan Gething. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this serious matter demands an independent investigation? It's not some internal Labour Party matter, and ultimately that company needs to get out of my constituency and let people in Pembrokeshire have their quality of life back.
My right honourable friend brings up an incredibly important issue, and I know that people in Wales are concerned about the relationship that he mentions, and I also agree with him on the need for transparency and an investigation regarding the Welsh Labour leader, because it's very clear that the situation is not at all transparent and answers are needed.
Mr. Speaker, it's been revealed by the Observer newspaper that the Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London is actually a member of the 6 Facebook groups which was mentioned by the member for Edinburgh North. And they are full of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism and the most disgraceful incitement to damaging property. And the worst bit, for those of us who were in the House when our members of Parliament were taken, death threats to the current Mayor of London, Mr Khan. Will he close down these Facebooks which have been begun by Conservative members of staff, and will he investigate the role of the current candidate and her membership of those disgraceful, racist Facebooks?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the election tomorrow will be fought on the substance of the issues that Londoners face, and the Labour record is crystal clear. House building in London has collapsed. Knife crime is rising. Mayoral taxes are up 70%, and drivers have been hit with ULEZ charges. And the Labour mayor just simply panders to unions and has decimated London's nighttime economy. That's his record.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, Mr. Speaker, is Staffordshire Day, where we celebrate all the brilliant things about the county of Staffordshire. So would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to our brilliant Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Ben Adams, and encourage the people of Staffordshire to vote for Ben tomorrow to make sure we keep Staffordshire one of the safest places to live, work and visit?
Well, I wish everyone a happy Staffordshire Day. And she mentions the PCC elections, and I think it's right that she does, because under this Conservative and previous governments, we've cut crime by over 50%, delivered 20,000 more police officers, but people with a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner are more likely to be victims of burglary, twice as likely to be victims of robbery, and as I said, last year knife crime in London went up by 20%. The facts simply speak for themselves. Vote Conservative for safer streets.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We'll let the front benches clear. To the first of the statements, I call Minister Tom Pursley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on immigration. This government is committed to reducing immigration into the United Kingdom, both legal and illegal immigration. Legal immigration has risen in recent years, in part because we've extended the hand of friendship to people fleeing conflict and persecution in Ukraine, Hong Kong and Afghanistan. That was the right thing to do. But another factor has been rising numbers of overseas students and workers and their dependents. They've risen to unsustainable levels. The steps my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, announced last year to cut net migration will mean that around 300,000 people who would have been eligible to come to the UK will now not be. We have restricted most students from bringing dependent family members, increased the salary most skilled worker migrants need to earn to get a visa by almost 50% to $38,700, stopped overseas care workers from bringing dependent family members with them, raised the minimum income for family visas to ensure that people are supported financially, and scrapped the 20% going rate salary discount for shortage occupations and replaced the shortage occupation list with a new immigration salary discount list. The latest estimates from the Office for National Statistics show that net migration in the year to June 2023 was 672,000. This is 73,000 lower than 6 months earlier. These are provisional figures and we need to go further, but these are encouraging signs. The latest statistics show numbers applying for skilled worker, health and care and study visas in the first 3 months of 2024 are down 24% on the same period last year. We removed the right to bring dependents on the student visa route for those starting courses from the 1st of January, other than on postgraduate research programmes and government-funded scholarships. Applications for student-dependent visas have fallen by 80% since our changes came into effect. From the 11th of March 2024, we've stopped overseas care workers from bringing family dependents and required social care firms in England to be Care Quality Commission registered in order to sponsor visas. In the year ending September 2023, an estimated 120,000 dependents came via this route. In the first 3 months of 2024, applications for health and care visas were down 28%. And this is just the start. Most of our changes have only just come into force. Meanwhile, we remain committed to stopping the boats. Following royal assent for the Safety of Rwanda Act and ratification of our treaty with Rwanda, we can now operationalise our plan to relocate illegal migrants to Rwanda. Rwanda is a safe country that has repeatedly shown its ability to offer asylum seekers a chance to build new and prosperous lives. It has a strong and successful track record in resettling people, hosting more than 135,000 refugees, and it stands ready to accept thousands more who want to rebuild their lives and who cannot stay in the UK. Once flights begin, we will have added another vital deterrence to crack down on the people smuggling gangs who treat human beings as cargo. The first illegal migrants set to be removed to Rwanda have now been detained following a series of nationwide operations this week. Operational teams within the Home Office have been working at pace to safely and swiftly detain individuals in scope for relocation to Rwanda, with more actively due to be carried out in the coming weeks. The action is a key part of the plan to deliver flights to Rwanda in the next few weeks. We've made solid progress in stopping the boats, but we need to finish the job. The number of small boat arrivals fell by more than a third in 2023. Our work with international partners prevented more than 26,000 crossings last year, as well as helping to dismantle 82 organised crime groups since July 2020. Our new agreement with Albania has cut Albanian small boat arrivals by more than 90%. And we recently signed a groundbreaking deal with Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, marking another crucial step in securing our borders. An initial cohort in the thousands of suitable cases for removal to Rwanda has been identified and placed on immigration bail with strict reporting conditions. We have a range of measures in place to ensure that we remain in contact with individuals, including both face-to-face and digital reporting. Immigration enforcement have a range of powers to trace and locate any individuals who abscond, as well as a dedicated team of tracing officers who work with the police, other government agencies and commercial companies to help trace individuals and bring them back into contact. It'd be inappropriate, of course, to comment further on operational activity. Mr. Speaker, immigration has enriched this country beyond measure, but it needs to be sustainable and it needs to be fair. Legal immigration should be focused on helping those in genuine need and on ensuring that our economy has the skills it needs in order to flourish. It is simply not right for those who can afford to pay gangsters to jump ahead of those who would play by the rules and whose need is greater. Nobody needs to flee to the UK from a safe country like France. Illegal immigration and unsustainable legal migration both place intolerable burdens on communities. Over time, they will undermine support for immigration in general, which would be a tragedy. That is why this government has a plan, which we're putting into action. There is further to go, but we're seeing the positive impact of it already. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for sight of this statement. But I have to say that this really is getting quite difficult to watch. Not for the first time, the Minister has come to that dispatch box desperately fishing for compliments when it is his government, his Home Secretary and his Prime Minister who are the cause of the catastrophic state of both the work-based migration and asylum systems. This is their chaos, their bin fire, and yet they expect praise each time they half-heartedly attempt to throw a single teacup of water towards the flames. Net migration has trebled since 2019 to a barely comprehensible 745,000. And under this government, the number of people crossing in small boats has spiralled from a few hundred in 2018 to tens of thousands every year. So it was toe-curlingly embarrassing to watch the Minister here claim that he's made, and I quote, solid progress on stopping the boats, when this year the number of crossers are at their highest level on record, more than 7,000 January to April. It was excruciatingly painful to watch the Home Secretary boast on social media about removing people with no right to be here, when the removal of failed asylum seekers has collapsed by 44% under this government since 2010. And the removal of foreign criminals has plummeted by 27%. And when he's completely lost track of 3,500 asylum seekers who he claims to be identified for deportation to Rwanda. It is also painful to hear the government figures bragging in the media that their Rwanda policy is somehow a success because a single person who didn't even cross the channel on a small boat has chosen to fly to Rwanda voluntarily with thousands of pounds of government money stuffed into his pocket by the Home Secretary. Mr. Speaker, this is not a policy. It's a headline-chasing gimmick, a fiasco and a farce. Labour has been absolutely clear that we reject the £500 million Rwanda scheme based on its unaffordability and its unworkability, and that will only cover 1% of small boat asylum seekers, and the government has no plan for the other 99%. We will repurpose that money to smashing the criminal smuggler gangs with our new cross-border police unit and a security partnership with Europol. And crucially, our new returns and enforcement unit will ensure that more flights take off to other countries which remove foreign criminals, failed asylum seekers and visa overstayers so that we can restore some control and integrity back into our asylum system in a way that is firm, fair and well managed. We'll also end the use of 250 asylum hotels and other inappropriate accommodation for asylum seekers, which is costing the British taxpayer millions of pounds every single day. Mr. Speaker, it is also, by the way, painful to hear the Minister bragging today about a reduction of health and social care visas awarded as a way of bringing down net migration. Firstly, based on such a small data sample. Secondly, because this is only one sector of the economy. And thirdly, because the Minister seems to care not one iota what this reduction in workers will mean for our elderly parents. What is the impact assessment? Where is it? And where is the plan to recruit local talent? Mr. Speaker, just a few questions to the Minister to end. On net migration, can the Minister explain why net migration has trebled since his party pledged to lower it during the 2019 general election? Will he admit that the huge surge in work-based migration over recent years is evidence of this government's total failure to deliver on domestic skills and training? Labour pushed the government into scrapping the unfair 20% wage discount on jobs in the shortage occupation list, which allowed companies to undercut British workers by hiring overseas. Can he explain why it took so long for his party to steal our policy? And on asylum, Home Office sources have told The Times that there are only 400 to 700 detention spaces reserved for migrants due for deportation to Rwanda. Can he confirm that this equates to less than 1% of the current asylum backlog in the UK? The Prime Minister promised to detain everyone who crossed the Channel on a small boat, over 30,000 last year. Given that we only have 2,200 detention spaces, what is going to happen to the remaining 28,000? The government's immigration and asylum policies have failed. We need to put the grown-ups back in charge so that we can fix this broken system and once again give our country an asylum and immigration system that it could be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, what a quite extraordinary response, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that this is a government that has a credible plan to bring net migration down by 300,000. And all of those measures are now in flight. And as I've been able to set out for the House, it is beginning to deliver the results that we said it would. And I will take absolutely no lectures from the shadow front bench about the issue of domestic employment. I was one of the ministers in the DWP that was proud to bring forward the Back to Work plan, the comprehensive reforms of the welfare system that we are taking forward as a government. And we are also seeing enormous cross-government join-up to support more domestic workers into those roles. That is the right thing to do, to support people in this country to take on these roles and fill those vacancies. And let's not forget the record of every single Labour government without fail, which leaves unemployment higher at its time of leaving office than it did at the start. What we've seen under this government is record low unemployment, benefiting communities across the country. And we've begun the process of delivering those measures in relation to legal migration, and we are also delivering when it comes to illegal migration. We have a plan. We are now getting on and closing hotels. 150 asylum hotels have been closed. That is a very positive thing. It is the right thing to do to make sure that we accommodate people in appropriate accommodation, but get away from the model of providing hotel accommodation for people. What is their plan on that? We have seen massive gains when it comes to asylum decision-making and productivity around those processes. What is their policy on that? We have seen crossings down by over a third last year compared to the year before. We have seen Albanian arrivals falling by 90%. Again, what is their offering to achieve likewise? There isn't one. And we will continue to sustain the progress that we have made. And we know from everything that has been said over the course of recent days that the Rwanda policy is beginning to have the desired effect, and the deterrent of that is clear. And when it comes to his meagre offering, I would just say this, that we've already doubled funding for the National Crime Agency for organised immigration crime work. We already have approximately 5,000 officials working on these matters within migration and borders. That is all that they're offering. It virtually resembles a blank sheet of paper, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that they offer no deterrent. They have nowhere to send people. They have no plan. They have no solutions. They try to bluff that they do, but they're kidding nobody. They're terrified that our plan is going to work. They're terrified that they'll have to scrap it. And they're terrified that they have no alternative. Only we have a plan, it's delivering results, and we will see it through.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, no hint of a plan of how you deal with failed asylum seekers from countries to which they cannot be returned without the Rwanda scheme. I'm pleased with the progress that the Minister has made on reducing net migration, but I am worried about the figures that came out yesterday, that of the 5,700 migrants who have been identified for removal, only 2,145 of them can be located. And this reflects the evidence from the second Permanent Secretary to the Home Affairs Select Committee earlier in the year, where some 17,000 failed asylum seekers who should be removed could not be located. Where are these people, and what is the Department doing about tracking them down and making sure they can be removed, as needs to happen as swiftly as possible?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend will appreciate that I can't go into the granularity of operational work that is ongoing in order to ensure that we can deliver on this policy. But what I can say is that an initial cohort of suitable cases of around 2,000 people have been identified for removal and have been placed on immigration bail with strict reporting conditions. For those outside that group, there is still a wide range of tools to maintain contact with them, and that includes, as I said earlier, the face-to-face and digital reporting, and many individuals also reside within Home Office accommodation. And we are confident, and my right honourable friend, the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration, leads on this work, but he is confident of the whereabouts once the decision to detain is made, and this is just one of the cohorts of people who may be eligible for removal to Rwanda. The policy is clear, and we are getting on and operationalise it, and that includes detaining people for the purposes of relocation.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thoulas.
Mr. Speaker, it is hard to know where to start with this complete and utter drivel. This minister comes here today proud of this tawdry, pathetic, self-defeating piece of fascist nonsense. The Tories, they don't like it, but Mr. Speaker, it is true. And I will explain to them why. Because the Home Office have put out Mr. Speaker, they don't like the truth. The Home Office has issued a promo video this morning of people being detained, and it absolutely turns my stomach. A government that glorifies its state-sponsored people trafficking plans as it cuffs people and takes them out their beds to be sent to another country against their will. It is sickening, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these plans are damaging to our society, to our economy, to the people who need care, to the people who want to love, live and study here. Universities are up in arms about their cuts to student numbers. It makes absolutely no sense. The draft rules that the government have issued on adults and risk in immigration detention were released this week. But instead of action on the very serious recommendations of the Brookhouse inquiry, the Home Office is instead doubling down on their policy of indefinite detention. And Labour are going along with all of this. Shame on them. Mr. Speaker, far from what the Minister said, small boat arrivals are up this year. Rwanda is no deterrent because none of the other policies that they have had have proved as a deterrent. And the thousands of people who they want to send have disappeared, never to be seen again. And who can really blame them, Mr. Speaker, if they're going to be plucked from their beds and taken away by ministers and sent to countries against their will? Indeed, who can blame them? And the risk also is that these people will end up being exploited because they have gone into hiding. They will be exploited, they will be trafficked, they will be vulnerable. Why is the Minister not acknowledging the impact that this policy will have on vulnerable people? And finally, Mr. Speaker, if it is indeed the case that the person that they sent to Rwanda has not been granted refugee status in this country, why are they not being returned to their country of origin? Is it perhaps that that country is actually unsafe? And if that is true, why weren't they given refugee status here in the first place?
Well, what I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that it's perfectly respectable as a position to want to protect our borders. It is right and proper to want to ensure that we have a fair and balanced system of legal migration that is sustainable. And I make absolutely no apology whatsoever, and nor will this government or any of the ministers in the Home Office, for placing front and centre the determination to protect people's lives. We have seen too many lives lost in the Channel at the hands of what are evil criminal gangs who take people's money, exploit them, send them in unseaworthy vessels out to sea with no regard whatsoever for human life. And candidly, beyond that, I'm not going to edify it with anything further.
David Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the fact that the Minister is able to come to this House with the first encouraging signs of lower migration numbers, which will be welcomed widely outside this House, including, I suspect, in Scotland. And does he agree with me that the lesson we should draw from this is that actually taking practical, detailed measures to crack down on the exploitation of certain types of visa routes is actually the way to make progress on bringing immigration numbers down, rather than the windy rhetoric we heard from the opposition spokesman?
Minister. My right honourable friend is obviously a very distinguished former Home Office Minister who had responsibilities in the immigration space. I would argue that a lot of the measures that we have announced and that are now all in flight really build on the earlier efforts of colleagues like him in these roles. He's absolutely right to say that these are balanced and measured policies that we are taking forward. that do deliver on the legitimate aim of wanting to reduce inflows of legal migration into our country, to ensure fairness and to make sure that the model is sustainable, that people who come here are able to be properly supported. And I think that that is something that the British people strongly support, and I entirely share his sentiment.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The National Audit Office have estimated that it's going to cost £11,000 per person to fly them to Rwanda. Can the Minister just tell the House which airline he will be using to transport people to Rwanda, and what his estimate is of the number of people who will be sent to Rwanda in the first 3 months of the operation of the policy?
The chairman of the Select Committee, who I have enormous respect and admiration for, will understand why I'm not going to get into either operationally sensitive or commercially sensitive matters on the floor of this House. We know, and we've seen it consistently, that there have been great efforts to try and thwart this policy in a whole host of senses over the course of previous weeks, months and indeed years. We are not going to be thwarted in that way moving forward. We've made commitments, we're going to deliver on this policy, and we will get on and do that. There is a plan. As the Prime Minister has said, we will be sending a flight within the next 10 to 12 weeks. That is where our focus lies, and it would be entirely inappropriate to share those logistics on the floor of this House.
Sir Jacob Rees.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As economically, mass migration has been shown to depress GDP per capita, and as it is clear that it is easier to control a much higher number of legal migrants, can I encourage the government to return to its promise of migration in the tens of thousands?
Minister.
Again, I'm not going to set out today what the government's future ambitions around this may be. What I am able to say is that we have a package of measures that is delivering a reduction in net migration of 300,000, spanning various different